And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. This is Andrew Kraft. Well, Republican Blake Masters, who last year lost his Arizona Senate bid, is set to announce he's running again in 2024. That's according to people familiar with his plans. I'm reading from the Wall Street Journal report by reporter Eliza Collins. She broke this story. And this would inject additional uncertainty into what is expected to be one of the most chaotic and competitive races in the country. So Masters did not respond to requests for comment from the Wall Street Journal. His expected announcement in coming weeks could put him on a collision course with the other would-be candidate there you see on video, Kari Lake, the popular fellow Republican, who is also leaning toward announcing her own Senate campaign. This fall, of course, Lake mounted a gubernatorial bid here in the state last year, coming up short as well. All right, in the meantime, though, let's talk about all this Arizona politics with my friend, Arizona politics reporter Cameron Arcand. He joins me now. Cameron, good to see you. Thanks for being with us on this Friday night. So I don't think a lot of people had this on their bingo card, a Lake Masters potential matchup. I can't even conceive of that. Can you? I think, Cameron, you might be muted there. All right, actually, we got you. Cameron, we got your audio.
All right, awesome. So, yeah, when I heard this too, I was a bit surprised. I knew there was some tension there over past few months in the aftermath of the election because Blake Masters had conceded his race to Senator Mark Kelly. He did not fight it in court like Kari Lake and Fincham and Abe Hamadeh did with their races. But this is a bit surprising because the conventional wisdom was if Kari Lake runs, she would easily be the front runner. You have pundits are now saying this has potential to split the vote between Lake, Sheriff Mark Lamb, who's already in there, and then Blake Masters as well.
Yeah, Cameron, I'm also struck by the fact that, essentially Blake Masters already did this once. He came up short. Usually you don't really get a second act in politics, especially for the same role, a Senate seat.
Yeah, that's the really fascinating part about this. I think in Arizona, we're in a perpetual Senate race the past few years, and it adds an interesting dynamic because Sinema is already considering a bid. I think that was another report that's out there, and she's running as an independent. But the interesting thing about this primary is I was reading a column earlier in the Arizona Republic that suggests that this could leave the door open for maybe a more moderate or establishment Republican to get into the race because these three might split the vote. But Blake Masters is going to really need to work very hard to differentiate himself this time around and combat the level of ads that were running against him last time, which really, arguably, a lot of pundits agree is what took him down in that last race. Was you had a candidate with very high name ID and incumbent against someone who's fairly new to the political scene.
Yeah, and Cameron, obviously Kari Lake, in the wake of her election loss, has made, the fact that she thinks she won the gubernatorial election part of her whole shtick. She says that time and time again out there. She was in Milwaukee for the last debate. She was in Iowa for the Iowa State Fair. This has become her brand. And so I'm just envisioning some of the attack lines that Lake would mount against Blake Masters. And one of them you already mentioned, because Blake Masters did concede the race to Mark Kelly. Kari Lake never did that to Katie Hobbs.
Yeah, and that's going to be something that I know for a fact will certainly be coming up as we get closer in this primary. If these candidates are in the race, we know that the last election is going to be a topic of discussion this time around. Now, is that something that might be the most productive use of the candidates' time? They'll need to see that through. That might be a major issue for a lot of the GOP base, but that is something that could leave the opening for other candidates before. I know people have floated a variety of different names and who could potentially also be joining this field, but it is going to be something that is a point of contention between both of them, especially since Lake is still throwing whatever she can at the wall, legally speaking, in order to gather more evidence, in order to essentially just kind of make a case at this point, even though pretty much the courts have repeatedly reaffirmed that Katie Hobbs did win the governor's race in Arizona.
Yeah, it seems like all those legal avenues have somewhat, kind of foreclosed all of that. But I'm also, interested in the fact that Kari Lake has not left the political scene since her loss. Blake Masters kind of did, so she's been out there. People have seen her. They have seen her on television, and he's kind of, gone into the shadows, if you will.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is going to become clear once the campaign season starts. I think Kari Lake has tried to maintain a national presence. She has still said she is considering. That's been consistent from what I've been hearing from sources. But she's tried to maintain herself as a national figure. She's stumped for former President Donald Trump in Iowa and different locations as well. And she's really trying to establish herself as a national figure. Whereas Blake Masters, like you said, kind of went away for a little bit. And it'll be interesting to see if he decides to hit the reset button on his messaging, which is something that he did during going from the primary to the general election in 2022. He considered himself and branded himself to be much more moderate, whereas in the primary, he was really going after the base in that sense.
Yeah, Cameron, what do you think Mark Lamb is thinking about all this news today when he saw that report in the Wall Street Journal, when he saw other reports about Lake? We've had him on the program before, and I asked him if he thinks he's going to have, a primary opponent. He kind of demurred when I asked him that, but now potentially two in his crosshairs.
Yeah, and that's going to be the very difficult part for Sheriff Lamb is the fact that not only were his fundraising numbers not great compared to Senator Sinema and Democrat Ruben Gallego, but also the fact that data that's out there showing that if Lake gets into this race, he's not going to be polling very well. And so he does have the benefit of being the only candidate in the race currently. But I'll also tell you something interesting, too. When I was covering the campaign back last year, these three were seemingly in lockstep with each other. I remember going down to the southern border, and all three of them were down there essentially supporting one another. And so it's fascinating to see how this arc has gone from the three of them basically in lockstep to now we could be seeing these three on a debate stage running against each other for the same seat.
No, that is such a good point, too. And I would imagine that they would all be vying for, whose endorsement, of course, former President Donald Trump. I asked Mark Lamb whether he would be seeking that endorsement. He didn't give me an answer about that either, but they're going to be seeking that. And only one of them is going to get it.
Yeah, I think we can place our bets on what's going to happen there, but we can't prognosticate on that. I think it's ultimately going to come down to, fundraising goals and who's going to be polling the highest and ultimately who is going to be most in line with Trump's agenda. And that's something that we are seeing basically in alignment. At the same time, we're seeing the presidential primaries. Are these candidates going to maybe be voicing their support for someone else? I'm referring specifically to Masters and Lamb. Will they be saying things that are maybe in support of another presidential candidate? But we know Lake for now is in lockstep with the Trump campaign. So, if we were to place bets, I think that's where it could go. But it is tough to tell. This race is a year out. Anything can change. We can't speculate too much because anything can happen. But I definitely think that once Lake enters this race, she will probably most likely be the front runner. But keep in mind, same thing was said about, you had Matt Salmon in the governor's race about a year ago, one of the leading candidates. You had all these other people in the gubernatorial race. Kari Lake was kind of an unknown factor at the start. Karen Taylor Robson, unknown factor at the start of the race. Both of them hop in, fundraising, all these advertisements happen, and pretty soon it was a two-woman race between both of them. I think the dynamics have time to shift and grow and change, but who knows?
Yeah, and then, of course, you have Kyrsten Sinema, who's not officially said she's going to be seeking re-election. Everyone thinks she is, and so, she has to keep her seat. So this is going to be a pretty interesting race, albeit probably pretty vindictive, pretty nasty. Arizona politics kind of has that flavor. Final thoughts, Cameron?
Yeah, this will certainly be the race to watch if you are a political junkie.
Yeah. All right, Cameron Arcand there live for us. We do appreciate your insight into this, your reporting, and have a good weekend.
Thank you.